Welcome, everyone. I'm so glad you're here. Thank you for taking the time to join us today. I'm Anu Malipatil, and I have the privilege of leading Overdeck Family Foundation. We're a national foundation, and at our core, our vision is simple: to ensure every child can unlock their potential. Before I hand things over to my teammates, I want to talk about why we're making changes and where we're headed. So, firstly, and most importantly, we're here because we want to improve outcomes for kids. That's our true North Star. 5 years ago, we launched a new funding model because we wanted to get better at partnering with organizations doing this work, better at learning from what works, and better at the practice of grant making itself. Now, 5 years later, we've paused to ask ourselves, are we having the impact that we hoped for? What's working? And where can we do even better? At the end of the day, this work is about improving outcomes for kids. And if we're going to help unlock that potential, we need to keep evolving. So we started by listening. We talked with education leaders, peer funders, and grantees. We conducted a grantee survey through the Center for Effective Philanthropy, and we analyzed our own internal data. We poured through both the data and the stories behind them. And what we learned was encouraging. We're having greater impact, building stronger relationships, providing more valuable support, and communicating more clearly about our work than we were 5 years ago. And that matters because it means that we're moving in the right direction. We also heard where we can push further. Grantees told us they want deeper partnerships and more strategic capacity building support in a fast changing landscape. The field needs us to be more focused and deliberate, supporting promising ideas and scaling evidence-based efforts. And both parties want simpler, more streamlined processes so we can spend more time on the work itself. So this feedback will animate our next chapter and points us towards more meaningful changes. At the same time, as we were doing this internal reflection, we couldn't ignore what was happening outside of our walls. As you all know, the education landscape looks fundamentally different than it did 5 years ago. Post-pandemic recovery is uneven and unfinished. AI is reshaping what students need to know and how they'll learn it. And with shifts in federal oversight, states are taking more responsibility for driving change in ways that we haven't seen before. So a lot about the future feels really uncertain. But one thing is clear to us. Children are going to need more than academic proficiency to navigate and shape the world they're inheriting. And this truth was a key driver of the changes you'll hear about. So all of this led us to evolve our mission. It recognizes that kids need both strong learning foundations and the skills and mindsets to navigate and shape their futures. We want kids to succeed in the world as it is today, and we want them to have the agency, the creativity, and the capacity to shape the world as it could be. So this shift in language reflects a shift in conviction, and it opens up new possibilities for how we invest and who we partner with. Alongside this, we've organized our work around three outcomes that matter most for students: school success, school readiness, and future readiness. Now, these aren't just new names for old buckets. They reflect a deliberate shift from bespoke portfolios to an outcomes-centered orientation. We know that if we want to move the needle for kids, we need to stay laser-focused on student outcomes, not just activities or programs. So spanning birth through 8th grade, these focus areas reflect our commitment to helping students build strong learning foundations, accelerate progress in math and literacy, and develop the skills, the cognition, and the agency they'll need to thrive in an unknown future. And it's also where we think we can have the most catalytic impact for our grantees and the field. So to be clear, this is an evolution, not a departure. We'll continue to balance direct impact with ecosystem investments. We'll keep pushing on issues like chronic absenteeism and AI-enabled solutions that actually serve students. And we'll stay committed to rigorous actionable research, and transformational relationships with our grantees. But what is changing is our focus and how we work. More outcomes focused, more strategic, and more collaborative. The details are in our blog post and on our website. But the heart of it is this: we want to be better learners, better partners, and better at this work because our kids deserve nothing less. So I'm hopeful today's discussion inspires ideas, collaboration, and possibility. And now it's my pleasure to introduce Josh Lotstein, our Senior Director of Grantmaking. Take it away, Josh.
Thanks, Anu. And hey, everyone, it's great to be with you, and I'm excited to be facilitating today's conversation. You're going to hear from many of my teammates who lead different parts of our work. Carly Roberts leads our School Readiness portfolio, which is dedicated to creating strong foundations for early learning. Fredston-Hermann and Jesse Silberberg co-lead our school success work, which represents two sets of strategies, one focused on teachers and the other on students. Previously, this work lived in separate portfolios. To make it more cohesive and impactful, we're bringing it all together with a shared vision to accelerate literacy and math outcomes across K-8, spanning both teacher and student supports. Emma Binet leads our Future Readiness portfolio, which is our newest. Emma is on parental leave, so she couldn't join us live. Instead, we've got a short recording of her discussing her new strategy that we'll share later. And finally, you'll also hear from Megan McCormick, our Senior Research and Impact Officer. Megan leads our work investing in research and evidence building. Before we dive in, just a couple quick housekeeping items. First, we've saved the last 15 minutes or so of today's webinar for Q&A. Many of you already submitted questions. Thank you for that. If anything else comes up during the conversation, feel free to put it in the Q&A box. I already see some of you doing that. And then if there's a specific panelist, if you can include that if you have one in mind. Also, as a reminder, the session today is being recorded. A link will be shared with everyone who registered after we conclude. With that, we can get started. Let's start with Carly. There she is. Hey, Carly.
Hey, Josh. Hi.
Carly leads our school readiness work. Carly, as you know, early childhood education has been part of this foundation's work from the very start. Given that, how should people think about school readiness today? And what feels most different about how you're approaching this work this year?
Thanks, Josh. I've been honored to be here since the start and am so thrilled that we are staying committed to our youngest learners in our grant making and at the same time sharpening our strategy to focus on the two places we believe can make the biggest difference for young children: early learning at home and stronger instruction in pre-K. We continue to believe that families and educators are the most important adults in young children's lives, and that school readiness is really built through relationships with those adults, as well as rich early learning experiences and support for the foundational skills that kids will need to thrive in school and beyond. So all of our grant making is in service of strengthening those adult-child relationships and creating higher quality and more coherent learning experiences for young kids. Most of our funding will support organizations that directly improve what children are experiencing every day, alongside a smaller set of investments that can strengthen the broader conditions for quality at scale. So our primary strategy, the first of these, is to improve pre-K instructional quality, grounded in the evidence on how young children learn best. This is really focused on expanding access to high quality instructional models that are already exemplifying the gold standard. They're joyful, they're play-based, they're centered on whole child development, and really designed to help educators build those strong relationships while scaffolding learning in a rigorous way. And we're focused on increasing coherence among curriculum, professional learning, and assessment, because that alignment is what helps drive stronger outcomes. In our second strategy to support families, we're prioritizing practical and scalable supports that help parents and caregivers build those foundations of early learning from birth through the everyday interactions that help children thrive. We know that families are under real pressure and looking for relevant and real-time guidance, and so we fund programs that meet them where they already are, including through trusted channels like the pediatric healthcare system with support that they can actually use. And because digital media is now a part of everyday life for all of us, we are adding a new focus area on intentional technology and media use in early childhood specifically, helping families navigate that digital environment in ways that support learning and relationships. So I'm thrilled that the commitment to young children remains and the strategy is more focused based on where we see the strongest impact potential for young kids and the adults that support them.
Thanks so much for that overview. Would love to dive a bit more deeply into some of the things you said. One of those things was the importance of supporting families as technology becomes a bigger part of young children's lives. What does it look like to help families navigate media in ways that support early learning instead of maybe competing with it?
Yeah, so our goal is really around intentionality and helping families make those intentional choices while also helping to shape a digital environment that makes it easier to make those choices. This focus area reflects the urgency of the moment. We know that children age 8 and under now spend about 2.5 hours per day with screen media on average. And families are navigating a digital landscape that was not really designed with child development in mind. Parents really know that this matters. They want support, but many are receiving conflicting advice and impractical guidance. So we are pro child development. We're not anti tech, but we know that tech and media have the potential to either strengthen or erode the relationships and experiences that we know help children learn. We also understand that what matters is not just how much technology is used, but how it is used, with whom, and to what end. And that evidence suggests that high quality content can really support language, pro-social development, especially when children are engaging with an adult alongside them. And as AI tools become more and more common, our view for young children is that these tools should support adults but not replace them. So, what this looks like in practice is that we will support efforts to connect families to practical evidence based guidance that they can actually use in their day to day, helping make those intentional and relationship centered choices about digital media. And families should also not have to carry this burden alone. So, we're looking to support those choices with better content, tools, and more upstream changes that can encourage platforms and creators to design around children's learning and development so that over time, the better choice becomes the easier choice. So, we really want to help families use technologies in ways that support their lives, that fit into their day to day, but ultimately that supports relationships and learning.
Thanks again. It's helpful to hear you talk about how technology and development can go hand in hand. Two other things that can go hand in hand are expanding access to pre-K and improving quality, but we know they don't always do. And so we'd love to hear a bit about how you're thinking about balancing access and quality in your grant making.
Yes, we definitely believe that access and quality do not have to come at the expense of one another. High quality pre-K is one of the most powerful and scalable drivers of school readiness, but we know the impact depends on the quality of what children are experiencing once they do have access. Um, we believe that we can expand access with quality through strong curriculum and aligned supports that enable the responsive teaching practices and developmentally rich instruction that kids need. So our strategy is designed to build both. We're building toward the ideal state while simultaneously improving the current state because we know that millions of 4-year-olds, including my own 4-year-old, are in classrooms every day. And so we owe it to them to deliver on the promise of early learning. So, on one hand, we're expanding the reach of high quality pre K instructional models that are already aligned with that gold standard of quality. As I mentioned, things that are coherent, child centered, play based. And at the same time, We know that moving toward that ideal will take long-term changes in policy, practice, funding, and most children are still in classrooms that don't yet reflect those ideals. We also recognize educators are doing really difficult work in systems that are not always set up to deliver the quality that children deserve. So we want to improve that current state by equipping educators with the professional learning, assessment tools, partnerships with families, and the supports that they need to strengthen instruction, regardless of what curriculum is in use. Overall, we think philanthropy has a role to play in shaping those external conditions that make quality pre-K more feasible at scale. And so while most of our funding will support organizations that are directly improving what children experience in the classroom, we're also helping to build demand for higher quality through policy, procurement, quality standards, and really trying to bridge research and practice aligned with what states, districts, and providers can actually adopt. Ultimately, our goal is to make high quality pre-K the norm. And in that sense, we're not trying to choose between access and quality, but working to ensure that as access continues to expand, quality also becomes easier to deliver.
Love that both and of quality and access, and the both and of the current state and the future state. But speaking of research, good to see you, Megan. That actually connects nicely to something that I'd love to bring you into. Uh, Megan, we know a fair amount about what high quality early learning looks like, but much less about how to deliver it consistently at scale. From a research point of view, what do you see as the biggest questions we still need to answer, and what are the risks if we don't answer them?
Thanks, Josh and Carly, for teeing up the evidence needs in this space so nicely. Um, I think the most important shift right now that we need, as you kind of alluded to, is moving beyond what works in very small, well supported settings, ideal conditions, ideal partners, and focus more directly on what it really takes with the empirical benchmarks behind that to deliver high quality pre K at a district-wide scale, at a statewide scale. Like Carly mentioned, we actually know quite a bit from the literature and learning science about what strong early learning looks like. These are rich interactions, aligned curriculum and professional learning, and developmentally appropriate content-rich instruction. The challenge is that that ideal state is very hard to replicate consistently across systems, given significant structural challenges in the early learning space specifically. So, some of the important research questions that we are pursuing with our research funding this year include: how do high quality instructional models translate when they move from pilot to district or statewide implementation? What are the core components that truly drive impact in high quality early learning models? And which ones can flex or be adapted without losing effectiveness? And lastly, what kind of supports, coaching, materials, data systems, even technology actually help educators deliver that level of quality consistently every day? We're also thinking a lot about technology in early childhood education. Um, AI is on everyone's minds, even early childhood educators, and it offers real potential, but also poses real risk. For example, if we move too quickly and start adopting different technology tools based on promises without understanding about how they affect the interactions that matter most in early childhood, those between adults and children, we pose a risk of actually undermining the learning that we're trying to support. To really effectively scale, we need empirical answers to these key questions about what works at scale, and through what mechanisms. Ultimately, the goal for us is to build an evidence base for the field that helps us not only expand pre-K, as Carly noted, but provide the clear guidance and tools that districts and states need to do in a way that's going to drive impact, where high quality experiences are the norm, not the exception for kids.
Awesome. Thank you both.
Sure.
Look forward to seeing you both in just a bit. In the meanwhile, we're going to shift gears to our school success portfolio, which focuses on improving outcomes for kids once they're in school. Jess and Jesse both lead this work together. While Jesse zooms in, we'll start with Jess. Jess, can you start by giving us a big picture overview of the portfolio and talk a little bit about the teacher-facing side of the work that you lead?
Of course, I'd be happy to. So, at a high level, our school success portfolio is focused on accelerating math and literacy outcomes for students in grades kindergarten through eighth. And this is grounded in evidence we've seen in the field that in order to succeed academically in math and literacy, students need to experience consistently strong teaching, access to grade level instruction, and additional support when they need it. We think that that's more likely to happen when schools have a clear, specific vision for strong instruction that's reinforced by coherent structures across curriculum, professional learning, assessment, and differentiated student supports, which Jesse and I will talk more about today. In practice, that means all of those pieces are connected and reinforce each other. So teachers are trained on the materials they're using, assessments reflect what's being taught, and then the results are used to guide ongoing coaching and support. And that emphasis on coherence is really central to how we're thinking about the work and why we aligned our teacher and student facing grant making under one school success approach this year. On the teacher facing side, which I lead, our strategy is focused on building educators' capacities to facilitate rigorous, coherent instruction that improves every student's learning. And heading into 2026, we'll approach that in two ways. The first is expanding access to high quality, cost effective, curriculum based professional learning and coaching that equips educators to improve student learning. And the second is investing in more innovative models of teaching and learning, like strategic staffing, which redesign how schools are using people, time, and resources to improve teaching and learning. Across both of those, we're also investing in the broader ecosystem. So building evidence and understanding of return on impact, as well as helping create the conditions for these approaches to take hold more sustainably across schools and across systems.
Super excited about that shared vision. Staying on the teacher side facing of the work for just a bit, what trends or opportunities have shaped how you're thinking about the portfolio in 2026?
Yeah, I'd highlight three things. First, we're seeing a growing gap between what teachers are being asked to do and the support that they receive to do that well. So, classrooms are more complex than ever. Teachers are serving a wider range of student needs. And while adoption of high quality instructional materials has increased, most systems haven't caught up in providing sustained job embedded support for educators to implement them with integrity. So, a big driver for us is how do we better equip educators to meet the range of needs in their classrooms? And that includes thinking both about how we extend the reach of our most effective teachers, as well as where other forms of support from additional educators, from technology, can most meaningfully strengthen instruction. The second trend, instructional coherence, has really emerged as a central challenge. So even when schools are investing in strong individual components like curriculum, professional learning, and assessment, those pieces are often not aligned in a way that reinforces a consistent vision of instruction. And that can result in variability and confusion in students' experience. That could look like learning a different approach to read in a tutoring session by guessing words from pictures that doesn't look the same as how students are learning how to sound out letters in a classroom context. So Jesse and I are really focused on building systems where those elements are mutually reinforcing. And then third, we see a real opportunity for us to test ways of making high quality teacher support more scalable and cost effective, especially given that it's a challenging fiscal environment. We have strong evidence that coaching works, but it is expensive and can be hard to scale. So we're interested in learning more about where new models, including some AI-enabled approaches, can help extend the reach of expert support and strengthen instructional quality. So there's a lot that we're paying attention to and that we're excited about. I'd say overall teacher-facing strategy for 2026 is really doubling down on what we know is predictive of stronger teaching and learning and more explicitly working to build the conditions that help that happen consistently and at scale.
Thanks, Jess. I share that excitement. Now let's bring Jesse into the conversation. Jesse is our newest portfolio manager. So first of all, welcome to the team. We are so happy that you're here. You bring experience from places like Arizona State University, Minerva, and IDEO, and you're leading the student-facing side of the school success portfolio. So tell us a little bit about how you're thinking about your strategies and what you're most excited to explore in your first year.
Thanks, Josh. I'm thrilled to be here. On the student-facing side, our work really anchors around the question of how do we help more students spend more time in activities that drive learning gains in math and literacy with the right level of challenge and support, and in ways that schools can actually sustain over time. And so within that question, we explore and pursue two core grant-making strategies. The first is supporting the development, scale, and implementation of coherent, high-quality curriculum and assessments. The second is strengthening differentiated supports, things like high-impact tutoring for students who need more support than core instruction alone can provide. So I'll share a couple of examples of ways that we're really excited to explore those strategies and how these pieces can connect in practice. One example is work we're doing with grantee named assessments, which aligns with illustrative mathematics core math curriculum and gives students feedback as they're solving math problems, while also helping teachers understand where students are getting stuck so that that information can really shape the instruction in real time and makes that data useful, not just on a summative basis, but actually guiding the instruction that students are getting over the course of the year. This can be a really powerful approach. It's also asking teachers to build new routines around data and feedback. And so at the same time, we're looking for ways to support shifts where curriculum becomes actually easier to implement and to use for teachers, knowing all of the demands on teachers and schools in supporting students. I was able to do some school visits in Boston last month, and I saw that even when you have fantastic curriculum, teachers are naturally going to adapt materials to fit their students, their own styles. And so how can we find opportunities maybe with curriculum providers that offer both math and ELA curricula to provide a more coherent experience for teachers? I think this is something we saw from those visits with our grantee Fish Tank that has both offerings. And I think it raises questions around, can we help students build shared habits around explaining their thinking, around using evidence, around communicating clearly, not just in ELA classes, but also in math. And that's a huge opportunity to really reinforce the benefits on both sides, rather than thinking about silos in classes.
Thanks, Jesse. I especially appreciate those specific examples, which really help concretize some of the strategies that you're talking about. Just building on that, we already know quite a bit about what works to improve student outcomes. Things like you were talking about, like high quality instructional materials and high impact tutoring. But we also know that schools and districts have a lot of challenges to implement those solutions at scale. And so what are you seeing as the biggest barriers and opportunities with implementation? And how are you thinking about addressing them through your grant making?
Yeah, it's a great frame. And I think, we've talked a lot about coherence already. We talked about sort of the tight fiscal environment. I think the biggest barriers that I see right now are around cost, fragmentation, and time. So schools may know what works, they may know, but at the same time, tutoring is expensive. Instructional supports oftentimes don't fit together cleanly, and teachers are really already stretched. And so at the exact moment when maybe we have more and more evidence about what's effective, we have more and more budget pressure that's making it harder to implement. And so for us, it's not just does the intervention work, it's can schools actually deliver it consistently at a cost they can bear sustainably. So that's part of why cost effectiveness in tutoring is sort of a big thing that we're focused on in the portfolio this year and in past years. So with a grantee like On Your Mark, they're exploring ways to look for more effective models than one-to-one tutoring, right? Finding ways to make that cost basis lower and make it easier for schools to sustain that type of intervention support over time. We're also exploring ways to help curriculum providers build what we're calling a more coherent bundle, right? So integrating assessments, professional learning, implementation support around a core ELA curriculum like CommonLit, for example, to help schools move from sort of general usage to higher fidelity adoption, which we know will drive better student outcomes. And while we mostly focus on the supply side of education, right, the tools that are being used in schools in a student-facing way, we're also looking for opportunities to solve challenges on the demand side, right? So we know that even when there are strong solutions that exist, procurement cycles don't always reward the things that drive the most impact. There's not always an easy way to compare things based on outcomes and value. And so that can reward things based on compliance with a buying cycle or process or level of activity that's happening around the product. And so that's what makes approaches of organizations like the Center for Outcomes-Based Contracting particularly compelling. There's an opportunity to align contracts and align the incentives of stakeholders to actually serve the purpose of driving student outcomes and bring a lens of shared accountability across all the stakeholders who play a role in driving outcomes for students across implementation, not just at that sort of initial buying point in the procurement cycle. And so overall, really excited to invest in approaches that maintain impact while lowering the cost burden on schools, and that make outcomes relative to cost matter more in how decisions get made.
Thanks, Jesse. One of the themes that I'm hearing from both you and Jess is around cost effectiveness. And we know that it's a tight fiscal climate out there right now. And so just appreciate you both thinking about the ways that schools and districts can stretch what might be more limited dollars in ways that have the most impact for kids, and how we can direct our investments toward that. So turning back to you, Jess, you've talked about using the next few years to rethink how schools deploy people, time, and technology. What excites you the most about the innovation you're already seeing? And where do you think the field still has the opportunity to improve?
Yeah, we're starting to see stronger evidence of student learning impact from some of these approaches that are rethinking how schools leverage people, time, and resources to meet student needs. A lot of them are moving beyond a one teacher, one classroom model that hasn't been working well for students or teachers. So it's exciting to start seeing some evidence that it does work better. What that could look like in practice could be differentiating educator roles so that our most effective educators are rewarded for extending their impact, and earlier career educators get more support, as in the opportunity culture model. Creating team-based models in which teachers collaborate to support shared groups of students, like ASU's Next Education Workforce, and or using technology strategically to redesign classroom time and provide students more opportunities for individualized supports, like a Modern Classrooms project. And one of the things that I find so compelling about these approaches is actually just building on something that you and Jesse named. They're not just adding new requirements for teachers or added costs to districts, but they're really working to reorganize the resources that schools already have in ways that can improve outcomes for both students and teachers, and really being tactical about existing resources, but using them to better meet student needs. At the same time, I'd say the biggest opportunity for the field is really creating the conditions for these approaches to scale sustainably. So right now, several models are gaining traction with positive results. There's growing interest in the field. Awareness is still a little bit uneven among educators and decision makers. And so in some cases, growth can be limited because of policy constraints around staffing, limited flexibility in how resources can be allocated, or a lack of strong infrastructure and implementation pathways. So for us, we're really thinking about the opportunity as helping move from promising innovation to something that's more scalable with an even stronger evidence base and easier for systems across diverse contexts to adopt and sustain at scale.
Thanks, Jess. So interesting. And once again, appreciate the specific examples that you shared. So looking ahead, and bring you both back in, what are each of you hoping to learn this year that could help the foundation invest more effectively in school success? And if there are any specific opportunities that you're especially excited about, we love specific examples. We'd love to hear about those as well. So we'll stay with you, Jess, and then go to Jesse.
Great. I obviously love that question. We are always learning in this work. This year, we're trying to learn as much as we can about what it really takes for professional learning and coaching, which we've committed to for several years, to really improve instruction at scale, and which features drive the strongest impact at what levels of dosage, including exploring where AI can play a role. Relatedly, we're also exploring what it takes to measure impact more clearly, especially around cost relative to outcomes, so that schools can make better decisions about which investments will best support their learners. We're also developing our own understanding and our core beliefs about the future of teaching and learning, including how educator roles and use of time should evolve. So all big learning opportunities for us over the course of the year. And in terms of investment opportunities, a couple areas stand out. We see a lot of potential in innovations in coaching, especially models that can extend the reach of high quality support more cost effectively while maintaining a focus on improving student learning outcomes. We're also interested in opportunities to strengthen instructional coherence, as I touched on earlier, across curriculum, assessment, professional learning, and instructional supports. And then we're excited about models that rethink how schools redesign their staffing and their use of resources to improve teaching and learning in a way that's both effective and sustainable. So if you are doing that, we'd love to hear more from you.
And more in a bit about how you could get in touch with Jess and the other teams that you're hearing from. But for now, Jesse, what are you hoping to learn.
So Just talks a lot about sort of AI potential and innovations around PL for teachers. I think we're excited to learn about how similar types of approaches could be relevant for tutors, right? And thinking about how we can make the training and coaching of tutors more effective and more efficient so that that can, again, reduce the cost basis and serve more students. I think part of that is driven by the potential around multimodal assessment that's possible with AI. There's also, I think, opportunities around multimodal assessment for students. And so AI can create an opportunity for capturing richer evidence of student thinking through things like voice and drawing and text and other modalities that may not reflect the ways that we've traditionally had to capture student input in the past in assessment. And I think that's exciting, not just because the tech is novel, but because it could make assessment more instructionally useful, make it easier to get that data and translate it into ways that are easier for teachers to apply in their practice, especially for students whose thinking may not always be best captured through traditional formats of assessment. There's so much activity in the market around AI and around innovation. We want to make sure that the research base is keeping up with the level of activity. And so a big learning focus for us remains better understanding where AI can genuinely strengthen K-8 instruction and support, and where conversely maybe it just adds noise to the signal. And so we support and are excited to learn alongside organizations like the AI Hub for Education at Stanford, which is continuing to build that evidence base for where AI is effective. Not only build the research base, but also get it into the hands of decision makers in schools and in districts so that procurement, again, is informed by what's actually driving impact for students. So I think I've named a couple of examples, but at a high level, again, our strategy is around high quality instructional materials, curriculum, assessment, and differentiated support. And so really excited to learn also what emerges in this landscape where so much is changing so quickly, to find opportunities to support the things that best drive student impact.
Thanks, Jesse. You were talking a bit about research and translating that into usable knowledge that can then be put in the hands of decision makers, which is a good cue to bring Megan back. Hey there again, Megan. Let's stay on the topic of learning. We've talked a lot about improving implementation fidelity, which I know is a research priority this year tied to the school success portfolio. Can you tell us what's in the works on that and what you hope to learn that could help decision makers like states and districts and schools make better decisions?
Yes, it's such an important topic, and it's one that we actually touched on already a little bit too with the school readiness section. We know from looking at the broad array of research in this space that one of the biggest gaps is that we still don't fully understand what it takes to deliver strong instructional supports at scale. So we have small scale research studies that show and prove whether something can work, but we don't necessarily know what the ingredients or conditions are that are needed to see it work consistently across real systems and what needs to be in place to maximize impact. Much of the existing impact research in education really glosses over implementation and treats it as a nice to have. If we have the resources, we'll explore implementation. But it's really a critical and necessary piece of information that is needed to take a piece of research, really understand what it means, and turn it into future action with clear guidance for districts, schools, and teachers. So given these clear empirical needs in the field, we're interested in using our research dollars this year to really hone in and address this need for better implementation guidance tied to impact. Key questions that we're seeking to answer are what level of dosage and implementation fidelity is actually required to generate meaningful student gains for investments in teacher professional learning, high impact tutoring, and high quality instructional materials, among others. What are the biggest barriers that schools and systems face in delivering those supports consistently, and how can they be overcome or addressed? Through empirical implementation research, we've learned that like scheduling in schools is a key limitation affecting the impact of high dosage tutoring. Despite that being a very unexciting finding, it has real consequences for how scheduling happens in schools to maximize the impact of those types of investments. We need better data like that. And we're also interested in exploring how different components of instruction, like curriculum, assessment, and professional learning, as just noted, are working together to support better implementation and driving stronger instruction and outcomes. Another thing that I want to note that is related to implementation as well is that we continue to be interested in research on how we can strengthen student engagement and boost attendance, especially post-pandemic. We're seeing a lot of promising interventions, as Jesse and Jess noted, but these aren't going to be impactful at all if kids, particularly those furthest behind, are not actually showing up to school to experience them. So we're continuing to support research to identify strategies that figure out how to boost attendance and student engagement at scale through different types of policies and supports. And lastly, aligned with this question of implementation, as Jesse teed up, we're seeing a range of AI research opportunities that we're interested in supporting as well. We are excited about the potential for AI to kind of support this need for how we can make things happen consistently and with better, more timely supports for teachers. But we really need to understand how those tools interact with existing instructional models and systems. So questions we're exploring are these AI tools strengthening coherence and effectiveness, or are they creating fragmentation and potentially undermining learning for the kids furthest behind? We're also exploring how we can better understand the impacts of like wider use of AI outside of school and differentiate it from the potential most effective use cases in school that are potentially like more aligned with teaching and learning needs. So the goal for us is really to build transparent and clear evidence through our research investments that help systems make better decisions and have the information and guidance that they need to put their dollars behind what's really going to work, and implement it in a way that actually delivers results for students in real world settings.
Thanks so much, Megan. As someone who used to work in school system operations, implementation is near and dear to my heart. And as someone who used to lead the team that ran scheduling, I can personally attest to just how challenging that can be. So everything you said deeply resonates. So thanks to you and to Jess and Jesse. At this moment, we're going to move on to the Foundation's newest portfolio, Future Readiness. And as I talked about earlier, Emma Binet, who leads this work, is currently on parental leave, so she unfortunately couldn't join us live. But we caught up with her and Megan before she went out to talk about how they're thinking about grant making and research for Future Readiness in 2026. So let's go ahead and roll the tape.
Hey Emma, great to see you. Future Readiness is a new portfolio and direction for the Foundation. Can you share a bit about what you're seeing in the education landscape, inspired your thinking for this portfolio, and your grant-making strategies for 2026?
Yeah, definitely. And there is so much. Big picture, I think what's shaped the strategies in this portfolio is the sense that we are living in a rapidly changing world. There's tech acceleration, employment disruption, changes in the ways that we connect socially and societally, and even the long tail of the pandemic. And that all of these things are coming together to change the world in meaningful ways that require us to rethink what it will mean for young people to be ready for a future that is more uncertain than ever. So a few specific things that we paid attention to. First, technology like AI holding both promise and risk for young people. So we're thinking about how AI's ability to replace an ever-increasing number of tasks and sort of rote codified knowledge will put the emphasis on higher order skills for young people like critical thinking and discernment and problem solving, while at the same time posing risks to those skills by outsourcing deeper thinking and learning. Second, human connection and relationships. Those are a fundamental human need reflected in many, many decades of research on the science of learning and development. So how can we satisfy that essential need in young people, and how can we do that in an increasingly tech-enabled world? So like, what's this right balance between sort of offline IRL experiences and tech-enabled experiences that can promote rather than degrade social emotional development? And then finally, we were thinking about a dynamic environment that I mentioned sort of at the start of my comments in school, in work, and in community that's going to require young people to be active agents in their own learning and future shaping. So they'll need self-direction, they may need to reskill, they may need to be in a position of co-creation rather than being sort of beholden to traditional classrooms or pathways. So recognizing all the uncertainty here, we've grounded on what we think are 3 enduring competencies that we think young people need to be successful now and to set them up for success long term. And those 3 outcome domains are cognition, connection, and agency, all future ready skills that we see endorsed by employers, by parents, by policymakers, and most importantly by young people themselves. So to that end, we are planning to anchor on 2 key strategies for the year ahead. The first is expanding access to active inquiry-based learning experiences, including out-of-school time programs and in-school project-based learning that both build critical thinking and problem-solving skills. And then second, we are planning to strengthen the communication, collaboration, and agency skills in young people through online and offline peer-to-peer experiences, mentoring, and advising programs that help young people recognize and fulfill their potential.
Super exciting. School time settings show up as a key lever in your strategies.
Yep.
What makes these environments especially powerful for building skills like collaboration, problem solving, and agency? And where do you see the biggest opportunities for investment in the coming years?
Yeah. So for those who know the Foundation's grant-making focus in our last chapter, you know that out-of-school time settings have been a key part of our strategy for the better part of the past decade. And we're really excited to maintain a focus here as part of our new strategy as well. And that's because, as you say, these environments are really powerful. They are interest-driven, they're flexible, they often allow sort of free choice learning, and those all enable youth to pursue their passions and curiosities, try new things, and gain experience in a low-stakes, more exploratory setting. And in some ways, those are challenging characteristics to cultivate during the school day. We think they all support that youth agency component that I talked about earlier. We also think that active learning experiences, especially in STEM, where we've done a lot of grant making historically, offer opportunities to tackle really complex real-world problems. And we see these experiences in long-term grantees in the portfolio like FIRST Robotics, National Inventors Hall of Fame, and the Museum of Science Youth Engineering Solutions. Again, this kind of learning is possible during the school day, and it's something we hope to support even more of in the years to come. But the time and the flexibility to pursue those sort of open-ended problem-solving experiences and have those unfold over multiple weeks, perhaps, is part of what makes after-school time so special. And then finally, we think that out-of-school time settings, which often have an emphasis on positive youth development and fostering connections between peers and young people and trusted adults, that all of these offer special opportunities for relationship building, teamwork and collaboration, and building those essential communication skills. So you asked me what opportunities for investment we see. Zooming out, I think there's 3 exciting areas where we plan to allocate dollars this year and into the next chapter. First is focused on scaling high quality learning experiences, ensuring that the supply of program meets just the overwhelming demand that we see from parents and young people. In other words, we just want more kids to have access to really great programs. Second is working with ecosystem organizations who can also tackle that access program. We know from recent data that families with high incomes spend 9 times more on out-of-school time activities than families with low incomes. So we'll be thinking about the ecosystem investments that can increase public funding so that all kids can benefit. And then finally, continuing the foundation's sort of evergreen focus on evidence building, we want to help districts understand the benefits of these programs so that they can make evidence-based decisions and understand how out-of-school time programs really do contribute to the development of these future-ready outcomes we're prioritizing.
Love all of that. And speaking of evidence building, would love to bring Megan, you back into the conversation. As you know, skills like agency and collaboration can feel harder to measure than academic outcomes. How are you thinking about evidence and learning in this portfolio, especially in early years when the field is still trying to figure out what future ready looks like?
Yeah, thanks for that question, Josh. It's such an important one because it gets at the core tension in this work. We have growing evidence in the field that skills like agency, collaboration, and higher order cognition are predictive of post-secondary persistence, workforce outcomes, and long-term mobility. But the measures we currently rely on are often weak. Many are self-reports, which are susceptible to bias and social desirability effects. They can also be really burdensome for schools to administer repeatedly and difficult to collect, analyze, and track over time in a meaningful way. So we're in a position right now where the field broadly agrees these skills matter, but our measurement tools are not yet strong enough to support disciplined learning or capital allocation decisions. That's why one major focus of our research strategy aligned with this portfolio is investing in developing a better measurement infrastructure for future-ready skills. If these skills are essential to our mission, then we need reliable, valid tools that can detect growth, that are sensitive to change over time, and that can be assessed really in a way that we can have confidence in what we're capturing. We're particularly interested in whether technology can help here through authentic performance-based tasks, embedded assessments, and AI-supported scoring so that measures can be integrated into existing instructional work rather than layered on as disconnected surveys and putting additional burden on teachers and students. Second, we are investing in impact research on grantees that are explicitly trying to build agency, collaboration, and cognition, as Emma noted. We want to move beyond theory and understand which types of experiences, both in school and out of school, actually produce measurable growth in these skills. So that includes asking for whom are these experiences most impactful. If these skills are linked to long-term mobility, we need to ensure that gains are really equitably distributed. In the early years of this portfolio, success for us in the research realm is not just about a single effect size or conducting one-off studies. It's really about building the foundations for a stronger evidence base for supporting these critical domains. So identifying clear definitions, more credible and usable measures, and building more rigorous and causal evidence linking specific experiences to growth in future-ready skills in the short and longer term.
Awesome. Thanks, Megan. Back over to you, Emma. How does that research lens shape what you're looking for in programs and solutions on the ground?
Yeah, so as Megan referenced, this is an emergent space and a place where we are really excited to learn alongside grantees and the field and hopefully contribute to a broader conversation about what future readiness looks like, how to measure these outcomes, and most importantly, what the impact is for kids. So in terms of organizations on the ground and what we'll be looking for potential grantees, we're taking a multi-pronged approach here. First, we are committed to working with our current grantees who are interested in integrating these new measures that Megan talked about and the tools into their evaluation plans. So we have a robust set of capacity building offerings across the foundation and expect to provide targeted capacity building in the areas of logic, model refinement, data collection, and planning to help grantees adopt new measures where needed and where they want to. Second, we'll be looking for new organizations to add to the portfolio who can demonstrate their impact on at least one of the future readiness outcome areas that we've named as priorities, recognizing that given the way these outcome areas are interrelated, many solutions might address multiple outcomes simultaneously. And while our ideal is that programs and solutions on the ground are measuring these outcomes directly, we also know that has challenges like Megan named. So we'll expect that some organizations use aligned proxy measures that are strongly correlated, and that will be okay too as our learning evolves. And then finally, we continue to prioritize relationships with organizations who can demonstrate a strong sort of learning and evidence orientation. So we're excited about early stage innovations in this space that may not have a robust evidence base yet, but who are committed to demonstrating one, who want to learn alongside us, and demonstrate a willingness to share what they learn quickly in this sort of ambiguous measurement environment.
Thanks, Emma. Excited to see what you find. I think that does it for our conversation on future readiness. Appreciate you and Megan sharing more about this new and exciting direction for our work. Coming back to you live, I hope everyone enjoyed learning more about our future readiness work and appreciate Emma making time to pre-record before her leave. At this point, we're going to bring everyone back to answer some questions from the audience. Give everyone just a moment. Everyone, thanks again to those of you out there who submitted ahead of time. If you have a question for one and or more of our panelists, you can submit them now in the Q&A. I know there are already a bunch in there, but we'll do our best to get to as many as possible. I'll start by answering a few logistical ones before we get into some meatier ones with our panelists. So we had a question from Curtis. How can new organizations apply for a grant with the foundation? Which I imagine that many of you are wondering. So we don't accept unsolicited grant proposals. The best way to learn about the kinds of investments we're making is to visit our website or subscribe to our newsletter and get in touch with our program team. The folks on the call today lead the various parts of that team. And later on, we'll share their contact information so you can get in touch with them and the folks that they work with. We also had a question from Althea. Are the investments restricted to certain geographic areas? I think we are US only, but otherwise we invest like across the country. And so there aren't any specific geographies that we are focused on. We look to make investments that have the most impact for the most kids. And finally, we have a question from Mike. How are we balancing short-term and long-term investments in both ecosystem and direct service investments? I'll start with the balance between direct impact and ecosystem investments. Most of our funding does go toward what we refer to as direct impact investments. So those are things like tools and models and other sorts of solutions. But that's not the only thing that we invest in. We also invest in research, like you heard from Megan, as well as policy and field building in support of scale and impact for those solutions that we are supporting through our direct impact investment. So it's a lower proportion, but still a meaningful one. As far as short and long term, speaking mostly around our direct impact investments, we tend to start with a 1-year pilot grant for those particular investments, which gives us an opportunity to learn more about each other and explore the possibility for a potentially bigger investment and a multi-year investment. And so we do have a mix of both short-term and long-term investments, and often we start with a 1-year grant before moving on to another 1-year grant or potentially a multi-year grant. Those were just some of the logistical questions that I wanted to address directly. Now we'll get into some of the questions on the strategies. And so we heard from many of you a question to the effect of as folks were refining their strategies, were there areas that were intentionally decided not to invest in, even though they're popular or growing in the field? Would love to hear from Jess, Jesse, or Carly on that, or all of you.
I can jump in. That's often one of the hardest parts of setting a strategy. I'll say for us within each strategy, we made some hard choices, both in defining our investable universe and then in some of the guardrails around that, and really trying to keep all of our decisions aligned with our North Star of improving math and literacy for kids. So, for example, in our portfolio, when we were looking at opportunities to redesign how schools leverage people, time, and technology, we focused on instructional approaches that can measurably improve student outcomes in math and literacy. So that means we're not planning to invest in orgs that are more focused on broader, more comprehensive school redesign, which can be quite expensive, or some new educator roles that aren't as clearly grounded in improving instruction. And we also looked at a couple other, when we were looking at professional learning and coaching, we're not investing in standalone or bite-sized PD. There's some interest in like really quick, flexible support, but we just didn't see strong enough evidence that on its own, it could translate into meaningful shifts in practice. We're not investing in AI literacy as a standalone focus. I think this question came up in the chat. We do think it's important for educators and for students, but we're prioritizing approaches that are really embedding AI directly into instructional supports rather than treating it as an end in and of itself, at least within the school success work. And then I think more broadly, we're trying not to invest in anything that increases complexity for educators without adding capacity. Someone had a question related to this as well about how to handle all of this when educators are taking on a lot. So we're really trying to be intentional around saying no to opportunities that are adding incoherence, putting additional work or confusion for teachers or students, without really being thoughtful about how they're integrated and how they build additional coherence.
Thanks, Jess. Jesse and Carly, anything you would want to add?
I can briefly give the student-facing complement to that. So, we're intentionally not focused on whole school models, just given some of the challenges around scalability and long-term sustainability. We're prioritizing in-school opportunities versus out-of-school time opportunities on the school success side, just given the more challenging dynamic of measurement for out-of-school time supports. And then in terms of the assessment work, we're really focusing on things that are diagnostic and formative in nature rather than things that are more summative. So those are a few things to highlight across our first strategy. On the second strategy with tutoring, there are so many great tutoring models out there. We're really prioritizing those that focus on sort of cost effectiveness at the core, knowing what the current fiscal climate looks like and sort of what will be sustainable and viable for schools in today's world.
Thanks, Jesse. And Carly, what about you?
Yes, so I added some of this in the chat in response to some of the questions, but in increasing our focus on pre-K, we are reducing our focus on other early learning environments and settings like childcare, recognizing that although childcare is, of course, critically important, it's a challenging and diffuse market for a national funder to move through philanthropy alone. In our work to support families, we're focusing really specifically on those drivers of early learning and school readiness that I mentioned. We are not directly focusing on the broader aspects of family stability and well-being that we know are also critical. And then while community-based learning spaces sort of beyond or extending the home are of course, wonderful and very important. We're also prioritizing away from those and focusing on efforts that have a clearer and more measurable connection to those school readiness outcomes. And then there were a few questions on the technology media side of things. So we are really primarily focused on adult-facing use cases, and we are not prioritizing standalone technology or ed tech for young children unless it's clearly grounded in child development and really designed to strengthen that adult-child interaction.
Thanks, Carly. I know strategies about choices, and these are hard choices because there are so many worthwhile things to fund. So I appreciate you not only sharing what you are funding, but also what you're not. We talked a bit before about chronic absenteeism, which is a hot topic and for good reason. And so I'd love to come to you, Megan, with a question. This one is from Brian. Curious what you are seeing on chronic absenteeism and what solutions are being tried successfully and unsuccessfully.
Yeah, we actually funded a whole cohort of studies in summer 2024 that were explicitly focused on identifying the drivers of chronic absenteeism post-pandemic and identifying solutions. There's three key learnings that we have, despite not having final results from these projects, that will be disseminating reports this summer and fall. The first key finding is that data really matters. Most districts in America, we're finding through our research, actually don't have data systems in place that alert them to absenteeism challenges in real time. So just putting in place some sort of data system in order to track and identify kids who are at risk of chronic absenteeism is a key kind of strategy that districts really need to make investments in. We also have learned through some research that we can actually predict who's going to be chronically absent based on the first 4 weeks of school. So when districts are able to take kind of reflect on absenteeism data at the end of September, they can be using that to come up with strategies for connecting with families really early on because it's highly predictive of future absenteeism. Another key learning that's coming out is that probably unsurprisingly, family engagement matters. So schools where the students, the teachers, and the parents are kind of rating that those schools have high levels of family engagement, kids feel a sense of belonging to the class, to the school, kids indicate an interest in going to school. They answer highly to the question, I would recommend this school to others. In those schools, we see significantly lower levels of absenteeism and a much faster kind of return to pre-pandemic levels than we're seeing in places where people are unlikely to endorse that statement. And final, just quick learning that I've been finding to be really interesting is that communication matters, but robocalls and like things that are just like obviously generated by a computer are not resonating with parents. More individualized supports that identify kind of who the parent is, who the child is, what the school is noticing about that child and their patterns of attendance does have a significant impact on whether we see a bounce back in absenteeism. So stay tuned for lots of great learnings. We're working with Attendance Works and Future Ed who are helping to disseminate those findings this summer.
Thanks, Megan. Appreciate you sharing some of those learnings. Back in my day, I sent many a robocall and robotext to very little effect. So that definitely rings true for me. And perhaps AI could help with that, some of that communication. And so just thinking about AI more broadly, we got questions from a lot of people about how you all are looking at the role of AI in schools or even in preschools, both in terms of potentials and risks. And so maybe we can go around the horn and just hear from everyone how they're thinking a bit about this. Would like to get us started.
I could jump in again. It's the middle child syndrome, trying to be patient with wait time. So on the educator-facing side, I think there's a lot of potential in high quality coaching, which we referenced a little bit earlier to help make coaching more accessible and cost effective. So teachers are getting timely, actionable feedback, both on their instruction as well as student learning. I also think there's a lot of potential in the reimagining educator roles work, as well as rethinking the use of class time so that educators are able to focus on the more human parts of teaching, like building relationships, facilitating discussions. And I think this is when we're actually really interested in learning more this year about the potential. So looking at the most effective combinations of human and AI or tech supported learning for which students in which contexts, which kind of cuts across some of our portfolios. In terms of where we see risks, Megan touched on this earlier, there's a risk of AI accelerating incoherence in instructional systems. It's really easy to generate materials. That doesn't necessarily mean that they're actually aligned with curriculum and assessment. It can add to the noise and become just another thing for teachers. I saw a couple things related to this in the chat, unless it's paired with strong guidance and integrated into existing systems within teachers' workflows. And then I think there's a risk of undervaluing the role of human educators and the importance of productive struggle for student learning. I imagine Jesse will speak more to this if we're positioning AI as a replacement rather than a support. So for us, we we know AI is already in schools, so we're really focused on ensuring it's used in ways that are strengthening teaching and learning.
And I'll just piggyback on what Jess noted related to our research interest in AI. We think there are amazing applications of AI, and people are studying the impacts on so many different outcomes. But we, with our new strategy, are very student outcomes oriented. And so in our AI work, we're really explicitly interested in understanding how supports for professional learning, supports for feedback, supports for providing personalized instruction, whether those translate into outcomes for students. And if yes, why? And so all of the research that we're hoping to fund, it's really explicitly focused on understanding that impact on students question.
Awesome. Jesse.
Yeah, I'll hop in and pick up the baton on productive struggle from Jess. I think that, AI can be there all the time, right? It makes it easy to get access to support. It's also really important to make sure we don't over scaffold for kids, right? And we don't make things too easy, over help, over hint in the supports that are student facing, because we know that how much learning comes from the right level of struggle as they're trying to learn and answer questions and build skills. And then I think just building on Megan's point, we want to make sure that we're thinking about the needs for students and the outcomes we're trying to drive for students, and then how AI supports gains against those goals, rather than saying we've got this great tool in AI, how can it be deployed all over the place? So I think that sort of speaks to the risk that Jess shared around like distraction of so many new things that could be possible. But I started off talking about teacher actionability on assessment data. I think that's a space though where again the AI can potentially help to translate really rich data and how it can be used and implemented in ways that are aligned to the contexts of teachers. So, then we're being very mindful of where there's opportunity and where to monitor the risks.
Right. And Carly, I know you touched on this a bit before, but is there anything else that you wanted to add?
Just that this is a really emergent area for everybody, but particularly for early childhood. And so, really thinking about, again, promoting relationships and supporting adults rather than supplanting them is sort of top of mind for us. And then we're doing some research also in pre-K in particular, and supporting some organizations that are using AI in use cases like coaching or making adults' lives easier and more efficient in terms of paperwork and other requirements in the classroom, but really focused more on adults than on children at this moment.
Thanks, Carly, and appreciate you thinking about this for our youngest learners. Doesn't get always talked about enough. So just one more question before we wrap up. This one's for Jess, and it comes from Amy. So Jess, can you say a little bit more about how you are or are thinking about supports for pre-service teachers, specifically around AI to support access, coaching, so on and so forth?
Yes. So our current strategy is mostly focused on in-service teachers where we can most directly impact outcomes for students who are in classes right now. But we are really interested in continuing to partner with others who are supporting across the full spectrum of educator supports. And I think there's a lot of opportunity in the pre-service context to help develop the skills and mindsets for implementing HQIM with integrity, not staying up all night to lesson plan, which was very much my experience my first couple of years of teaching, for developing mindsets around collaboration, working in team-based models that are maybe different than the one teacher, one classroom that most of us went to school in. And so there's some organizations like Really in Teaching Lab that are starting to explore more innovative approaches to teacher prep. That's not something that we have not historically done as much support directly in the in-service context, but we're really interested in thinking about coherence across that entire spectrum so that educators are trained in the materials, types of classrooms that they'll be working in, and then get aligned coaching and support throughout their careers. And I think AI also plays into that as well, developing skills, mindset, facility early on.
Awesome. Thanks, Jess. And thanks to the rest of our panelists. Appreciate you answering all those questions. At this point, we're going to start to close out, and we'll just take the next couple of minutes to do that. So thank thank you to all of you for joining today's conversation. We are really looking forward to digging into this work, which feels more important than ever. If you'd like to reach out to any of our team members from today's webinar, I previewed this before, here it is. Here's their contact information. It will also be shared in an email along with today's recording, including for those who weren't able to join live. To stay up to date on all of our latest news year-round, please subscribe to our newsletter and follow us on LinkedIn. And lastly, you'll see a quick survey pop up as you exit the webinar. We're very data-driven and use your feedback to shape our future content. So we'd appreciate any feedback that you have for us. Thanks again for joining us. We hope you have a great rest of your day. Bye and take care, everyone.